Hello, and welcome to the Movie Universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Today I'll be reviewing the 1935 film, The Case of the Lucky Legs. If the title sounds familiar to you, you would know it better from an episode of Perry Mason, which means this is a Perry Mason movie made back in 1935. And this was just one of 6 films. If you're shocked, I don't blame you. I didn't even know these existed either until I found them by accident. For the story, there really isn't much to say. It's just a case of a girl who won a beauty contest and the promoter skips out with all the winnings and he ends up dead and she's accused and Perry has to defend her. It does follow the story very well. However, it has a serious drawback, and that is the cast itself. Perry Mason is played by Warren William, an actor who did a lot of films, mostly romantic comedies, such as The Gold Diggers 1933, which was an okay film, but he just did not fill the role properly. I say that because this Perry Mason acts like a lush. I'm not kidding. When we first meet him, he's passed out in his office with a hangover. And as the movie goes on, he's constantly drinking. And apparently he even has medical issues too, because his doctor comes to see him and puts him on a strict diet. Della Street is played by Genevieve Tobin. I'm not familiar with her work at all. In fact, I looked it up, and again, it just seems to be romantic movies, which is something I never watch. Throughout the whole film, she really didn't have much to do with it at all. What's even worse is there's no Paul Drake. No, there's just some guy who Perry is friends with and is pretty much a drinking buddy. He just seems to be an informant off the street. And his name is actually Spudsy. For some weird reason, they thought it was necessary to cut out a very key character in the whole Perry Mason genre. At least in this film, because later on they did put Paul Drake back into the story in some of the later films. But still, a schmuck off the street named Spudsy? As for the rest of the cast, the only one who stands out is Porter Hall. You would know him best from the Christmas classic Miracle on 34th Street. He played Granville Sawyer, the so-called psychiatrist that worked at Macy's. The rest of them are pretty much nobodies. They're just a bunch of people who show up in movies and you never remember who they are. Now, I gotta say, I was very disappointed in this movie because I expected a little bit more than what I got. And apparently, back in the day, this movie actually got 3.5 stars. But to be fair, this was before the legendary TV series, so I can cut it a little slack for that. However, I do not believe they captured the cast the way they should have. Because, as I said before, Perry Mason is a lush, and that just isn't him. Perry Mason was never a lush. He was just a brilliant lawyer who would do anything for his clients, not drink like a fish. I don't blame Warren William for this. I just blame the script he was given to work with. In fact, I swear the writers who did the Thin Man movies was what made this particular one, because Nick Charles was a bit of a lush. He was a brilliant detective, don't get me wrong, but he was always going for cocktails whenever they were around. That's what makes me say the same writers probably did this movie. It's like they tried to turn Perry into Nick Charles, and he's not Nick Charles. They are two completely different characters. You can't just take one and make him like the other one. Besides, if Earl Stanley Gardner would have wanted him to be a lush, then he would have done it. And Della Street here, she's not given anything to work with at all. For what little time you see her, there just isn't any chemistry going on here. There's no boss and secretary chemistry. On the TV series, with Raymond Burr and Barbara Hale as both Perry and Della, there was some serious chemistry going here. When they played their parts, you could definitely see boss and secretary. A secretary who you could count on, rely on for her opinions, as well as for her advice. And at the same time, there was the question, was there anything going on between them? Which is something that we will never know. With this Della Street, it's not like that at all. It's like, oh, I just work for that lush, that's all I do. He's brilliant, but he's still a lush. It's a living. That's all I get out of Della Street in this picture. And there is one thing that should be mentioned. Genevieve Tobin, she was probably beautiful for the time, but Barbara Hale, she was downright gorgeous. There's no denying it. And again, Spudsy instead of Paul Drake? I know, I've been pretty unfair about this because I grew up with the TV series. Beforehand, I never knew these movies existed. In fact, they never released them until recently, which goes to show you how great that series really is. The series is so great that it supersedes these original movies, especially this one. My advice is to stick with the TV series. However, if you want to see what they tried to do beforehand, you might want to give it a shot, but you might want to try to watch this before the series. That way you won't be saying the same things that I am right now. This is Movie Fan, signing off.